Hello everyone, Boba Time Hopper here, and welcome to the very start of Season 2 of our Walking Dead Randomizer Rewrite series! There are several things we are going to need to do before we officially start the episode. Firstly, I would like to say that I now have a Patreon, and it is completely free to join. Members get access to my Discord server, can vote on future content, and even join in on calls as I write upcoming videos. You will see that underneath my channel itself in the link I have up there. For those who want to support the channel further, there are also two paid tiers. Anyways, now that that shameless plug is out of the way, we will get back on track. Those of you that remember the first episode of this series know that I will be discussing the character relationships at the last season's endpoint before I go into the events of this season. And they also should know I will need to roll for who become main characters this season. So let's get into that. Firstly, character relationships. Our group is honestly in a bit of a mess at the end of Season 1. So it's going to be a little hard to go into their dynamics here, but let's just go. Firstly is Shane. He was starting to show the very first cracks in his mental state by the very end of the last season, and was holding it together mostly because he had a stable base. His leadership wasn't threatened, and he had help from friends like Leon and Daryl, and he had advisors like Dale. However, because the group trusted Rick more than him on the ideas of going to the city, and because of Rick having made several comments about family and Lori, their relationship, while still very good, is starting to show its first cracks. His relationship with Lori has also fallen apart, just like in canon, but this time he has more support and is around her a lot less, so his obsession isn't forming, despite the fact that he does still have feelings for her. And aside from all of this as well, he's also interested in what Jenner may do. While he isn't as optimistic as Rick or Glenn or Daryl, he wants to believe that Jenner can make a cure. Next is Rick. As mentioned in Shane's section, their relationship is still way better than canon, but it's starting to strain. Rick's relationship with Lori is even rougher, for reasons I'll get into in her section, but on the surface, it seems to be going back to how it was before Rick got shot. And like I said in Shane's section, he is pretty optimistic about Jenner and truly believes that there could be a cure. Next is Leon. Leon is honestly starting to harden as a man. He began the apocalypse young and dumb, surviving almost entirely thanks to Shane's training, which makes him respect Shane immensely and trust him implicitly, even when he disagrees with his methods. He's grown close to a great many people in the group because of his lovable fool personality, especially Dale, Andrea, and Amy. And Dale's death hits him extremely hard, as Dale was even more of a father figure to him than Shane was. And with Amy emotionally broken after losing her sister and Dale, Leon has to push himself even harder to continue supporting her. Next is Daryl. Daryl is very optimistic about a cure, hoping against hope that Jenner can save Merle. He's still a bit mad at Shane for how he handled the Merle situation, but he also understands why and respects Shane's strict leadership. Daryl has a pretty strong friendship with Carol as well, who is the first person he's ever truly opened up to. Speaking of which, now I will speak about Carol. She has, across these episodes, been splitting off from Ed and becoming more independent in an arc that started a while before the series even technically started. Shane taught many of the group, her included, how to use weapons, and also Shane defended her from Ed alongside Leon and Daryl, which has caused Carol to have a great amount of respect for all three of them, even when she thinks that Shane is a little strict. She is closest with Daryl out of these three, and tries to be there for him when he starts to struggle near the latter end of the previous season, and their bond strengthened the most when he defended her against Ed for the final time. It should also be mentioned that she is not worried for Ed at all. She has long since grown past him, and now all she's focused on is keeping Sophia safe and helping her friends through their current troubles. Guillermo is next, and he is starting to feel immense guilt for what has happened to his people. He believes himself responsible for the fall of the old folks' home and the loss of Ed and Dale and Jorge and the majority of his own people. He has a lot of respect for Rick as a man and blames himself for the pain that he and his people will feel and dreads telling him and Shane about what happened. Speaking of which, he also likes Shane, viewing him as more pragmatic, if not a more aggressive leader that he believes he should have been, as he thinks that if he was more proactive in his group's defense, perhaps they would not all be dead now. He pushes all of those feelings down, however, as he must focus on defending those that remain for the time being. Now let's talk about Glenn. He is, as I mentioned previously, very optimistic about a cure, and is excited that he may be able to go back to his old life. Glenn also has a lot of faith in Rick and likes him a lot, as he prefers Rick's kinder and more optimistic styles to Shane's more dictatorial styles. As for T-Dog, he is basically the same as Glenn here. Sorry, I don't have a ton to say on him, but him and Glenn both don't know about what happened with the attack, and have had relatively good lives compared to most of the cast at this point. Anyways, next is Amy. She is completely and totally emotionally shattered with the losses of her sister and Dale. As mentioned in Leon's segment, she has him trying to care for her, but it barely registers, as she has just suffered far too much in far too short a time to fully process it for the moment. As for Jim, he has nearly completely been consumed by the survivor's guilt he's been feeling thanks to Dale's death, and feels even more alone than ever, as unlike Amy, he has no close relationships left to turn to. Unlike Amy, however, he has not shut down, but instead he is hallucinating more and more as his mind unravels. Now we get to Lori, and as we discussed in Rick's section, her relationship with Rick is rocky, to put it lightly. She thinks that Rick is being overly kind, and because of that is putting her and Carl in active danger. She also still thinks that Shane lied about Rick being alive, and so she is still keeping him away from Carl, whom is the only person other than Carol that Lori has been regularly speaking to by the end of the season. She is also quite messed up after the attack, as she was terrified that Carl could have died, and hated that Carl had to see Dale's death. So she is both scared for her family and even more angry at Rick for convincing her to go there, and at herself for listening to him. As for Edward, he is probably doing the best out of the group that wasn't at the CDC mentally. While Dale was a fast friend to Edward, and he feels bad for not being able to save the elders of the Vatos base, he is also more at peace with himself and willing to accept that failure. He is going to try and get closer to Leon and Jim, Amy, Guillermo, Antonia, Felipe, and Miguel to help them get through their traumas and pains, as Dale would have had he survived. Speaking of which, Antonia is also quite mentally messed up. She blames herself for Dale's death, in a way. She thinks that if she had not been relaxing and instead had been working, maybe she would have seen them and Dale wouldn't have died. Also, she was very close to Shane across this series, and we will see that she and Shane were right in not wanting to go to the city, trusting his judgment even more now while starting to think that Rick is soft and will get them all killed. As for Felipe, he is starting to lock himself off. He has lost a lot of the people he cared about when the base fell, including his own grandmother, but he has to stay strong to help support his younger cousin Miguel. He is still very loyal to Guillermo, as he is his best friend, and he doesn't blame Guillermo for what happened, as he feels it may have been inevitable. He also started to develop a friendship with Antonia before the events of the final episode, so he would feel a bit bad for her and will work with her to help defend the group in the future. As for Miguel himself, he is going to be very traumatized. He lost his grandmother and his friends and his gang in one swift moment, and is going to be sticking very close to his cousin Felipe and the few surviving Vatos gang members. He will also stay close with Amy and Glenn, or at least try to, as they're some of the few survivors that he actually trusts. Then you have Carl. Carl is starting to grow up far faster than he should, despite how much Lori tries to suppress that. His relationships with Rick and Shane are still very good, but are strained, as Lori is still mad at them and is keeping them away from him. Shane, whom she still regrets having ever been with in the first place, and Rick, whom she is mad at for his terrible decisions. However, this behavior also makes Carl a bit angry at his mom, as he still very much so looks up to Rick and Shane and wants to grow up to be just like them. Next is Sophia. Sophia has become even quieter and more cautious than normal, sticking close to Carol and Carl. While still gentle, there is the beginnings of a tougher survival instinct forming with her fear, especially with how much she hangs around Carl, whom wants to get more active in helping the group. With Carl's influence, Sophia is starting to understand that the world will not protect her, and that she might one day have to protect herself. Lastly, we will talk about the few Vatos gang members remaining. We have 19 people that died in the initial attack, mostly the elders, and several more were injured and barely escaped to the vans. 2 vans hold all of the Vatos survivors that are uninjured, with 1 Vatos van having 2 young Vatos members and all the surviving old people. They are still in shock, but trust Guillermo will get them to safety. 9 people remain, 3 old and 6 young, with all 3 of the elders being injured and 1 of the younger people being injured. Now that all the character reviews are out of the way, the last thing we need to discuss is the main characters. In Season 2 of the original series, there are 8 main cast, and we are at only 5. So we need 3 new main characters for this season, and we will roll these 3 from the list of side characters available. The only ones who will not be available to become main characters will be Edward and Antonia, as they are fan characters and have not done a ton in the ways of the story yet. Anyways, time to roll! Alright, so let's see which of these minor characters will become main characters. Let's shuffle, 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 but before we roll, let's get rid of, for the time being, Antonia and Edward, as they don't have the right to become main characters, they are side characters as I have previously mentioned. Let's make this first roll. The first of the main characters added are Guillermo. Guillermo, that is a fascinating main character to add. Leader of the Vatos gang, now being a member of the main cast. Fascinating stuff. Who will this second one be? Amy! Let's go! Alright, so this could be... that could be very interesting. We could have a whole lot more Leon and Amy moments because of the both of them just being more important characters. I think that could be a very interesting situation. Alright, so let's shuffle a couple more times. Who will be the final character added to the main character wheel? Jim! Alright! Interesting, interesting, interesting. We could definitely dive deeper into Jim kind of losing his mind with time. Alright, that looks like that's a really interesting main character list. We'll have more characters join the minor character list with time. And let's get into the actual episode. The Walking Dead, Season 2, Episode 1, TS-20. The episode opens at the party where we left Shane's group at the end of the last season. We see Shane sitting at the table having barely touched his drink, while T-Dog and Glenn are sitting next to each other wasted, much to Daryl's delight. Even Rick has joined in on the festivities, drinking another glass of wine as Shane leaves the room. Shane walks for a bit in the halls before sitting down in an area outside of the laboratory in which Jenner is working. He rubs his head as he thinks to himself that as much as he wants this to be the end of it all, it's too good to be true. Rick eventually notices Shane is gone as Daryl leaves to go sit near Merle's cell. Rick walks the halls looking for Shane until he finds him sitting outside the lab and asks if he's alright. Shane interrupts Rick before he can continue, asking Rick if he is really sure that Jenner can find a cure, because Shane wants to be, but he can't. Rick says that if anybody can, it's Jenner, and Shane gets annoyed as he says, "That's not an answer." Shane stands up and says to Rick, "What if nobody can? What if there is no cure? If there isn't, then they came there for no reason and left their group with less people and weapons to defend themselves. If the people Guillermo warned him about come by, Shane stops himself before he can finish the thought, and he storms up to the door of the lab to knock on it. But before he can, the door slides open, and out steps Jenner with a dead look in his eyes. He tells them that he used up the last of his samples of TS-19. Rick says, "So you found something?" But Shane says, "Look at him. Of course he didn't." Shane then slams his fist into the wall before walking away. We then see Daryl sitting with a wine bottle outside Merle's room, looking down the hall in the direction of the lab, and he stands as he hears footsteps echoing. Shane appears at the end of the corridor looking pissed, and he says, "You ain't gonna like this." Daryl asks him what the hell he's talking about, and Shane tells him that Jenner found nothing. Daryl stutters a bit before he says that Jenner must have more tests to do, and Shane shakes his head at Daryl and says he's sorry. Just as Daryl starts to try and ask Shane more, Jenner and Rick round the corner, and Daryl asks if it's true. Jenner looks away from Daryl as Daryl gets up at his face and asks, "Is it true? Is his brother dead? Did Jenner get their hopes up for no reason?" Daryl tries to swing on Jenner as Rick holds him back, and Jenner says that Merle will die. Jenner then reluctantly says there may still be value in... Jenner is punched by Daryl, who says he dares Jenner to finish that sentence. Rick pulls Daryl aside as Shane watches. Jenner then continues, saying there may still be value in his brain matter, as he wipes his now bloody nose. If he can study it, maybe he can make a cure for the others. All he needs is Daryl's permission, specifying that he must be quick, as once Merle turns, it'll all be useless. Daryl starts to tear up and hold his head in his hands before he says, "Just do it," and Shane and Rick nod in approval to Jenner. As Jenner types in the code for the door, Glenn and T-Dog arrive on the scene, having heard the shouting. Before either can even ask what happened, Jenner screams as Merle's walker leaps onto him. Alright everyone, so we have our first coin flip of Season 2. This one is going to be a pretty interesting one because we are going to determine if Dr. Jenner gets bit or not. I'll say heads, he is bit. Tails, he is not. Tails! Alright, so this will be interesting. I wonder how this will play out. Shane immediately shoots at Merle's walker, blasting its head off before Jenner can be bitten, and Daryl rushes to the body of Merle, sobbing again as Shane steps back, looks away, and walks off. Jenner's ears ring, and he is still in shock before he looks to Merle's body and realizes that Merle was too far gone. There is no TS-20 anymore. He was too late. Jenner sort of chuckles a bit before he starts to tear up, and he says, "It's all over." T-Dog and Glenn look on in sorrow for Daryl as T-Dog says, "We really came all this way for nothing." Rick says they can still get the meds, and he walks off to find them as T-Dog and Glenn try to comfort Daryl, and Jenner slinks off towards the control room. We then see Jenner sitting by the control panel as he sees a caravan of vans pull up on the cameras, with a horde of walkers following them. We then switch to Guillermo's perspective as he shouts for Shane or whoever is in there to let them in. Jim tells Guillermo that they should get back in the cars as leave, as there's nothing here, but Carol notices the truck Shane and the others took and says they must be here. Guillermo bangs on the door more and more until it opens as several of his men carry the injured elders inside. Once they get inside, we see Dr. Jenner, who is shocked at the amount of people and how many injured there are. Jenner asks what happened to them all, and Guillermo says they were attacked by some guys with automatic weapons from a roof nearby their base. Leon, whom is holding Amy in his arms, asks Jenner where Shane and the others are, and right as he asks, they hear people running down the hall. Shane appears first, then T-Dog, then Rick, all of them taking in the bloody scene. Rick instantly gets to work, telling Jenner to get beds for the wounded, and telling all those that can walk to help get the wounded into the med bay where he was getting medicine earlier. Shane stands frozen, however, looking over the group almost like he's counting heads before he says, "Where's Dale?" Nobody answers at first, so Shane shouts the question this time. Guillermo goes to Shane and he says that they got Dale. He's gone. Shane rubs his head and breathes out, nodding as he says, "Yeah, of course," before walking off. We then cut to the medical bay as we see Jenner saying everyone will need blood tests before he can help them, and Guillermo tells him to hurry it up then, his people are hurt. Jenner then turns to grab some vials as we pan over to Leon sitting next to Amy in a medical bed. Amy is still lying there unmoving as Leon tears up and says to her that everything's going to be okay. They're safe now. Carol sees them from across the room and walks over to them as she tells Sophia to go to Carl and Lori. When Carol gets there, she asks how Amy is, and Leon says that she still hasn't moved much since... Leon stops himself from saying the name as Edward walks up to them. He places his hand on Leon's shoulder and he says it's shell shock. She'll get better with time. Carol nods with this, and we then see Daryl and Glenn walk into the room. Glenn looks across the room, seeing Amy in the bed with Leon crying next to her, so he goes to check on them. Daryl looks around as well, and he sees Jim muttering to himself near the walls, and Felipe, T-Dog, Rick, and Guillermo helping Jenner bandage several of the wounded. He then stops Antonia as she is about to run by and asks her what the hell happened. Antonia shoves past him and says they were attacked as she goes to help the injured. Daryl's eyes sweep the room, noticing several missing faces, and he then asks Rick if everyone made it. Rick says no and leaves the room before Carol walks up and asks where. T-Dog cuts her off as Daryl looks away and Carol realizes what must have happened as she apologizes to Daryl before hugging him. We then cut out to the hallway again as Rick sees Shane outside the supply closet just sitting there, drinking. When Shane sees Rick, he smiles and says, "Figured I'd find a quiet place to calm down." Rick looks him over for a second, noticing that Shane is hammered and very tense. Shane continues, saying that the group looked to him before Rick came back. He kept him alive for months. Then they started listening to him. Do you really think that bringing everyone so deep into Atlanta was a good idea, Rick? Rick pauses before saying, Fort Benning would have been no better. Shane then takes a swig and says, maybe not. But maybe if we hadn't gone on this wild goose chase to find a cure, Dale would still be alive. Same for all those Vatos members as well. Rick is frozen for a moment before saying, coming here cost us, but it could have saved us all. Shane sits there for a second before saying, maybe, but it didn't, before he walks off with the bottle in hand. Rick then sees Jenner walk out to check if he grabbed the supplies for him, and he takes them from Rick's hands before he sends Rick off to bed with the others, saying Antonia, Miguel, Leon, and Felipe said they would help him. Rick takes Jenner's advice and walks down the hall past the med bay where he sees the team caring for the injured and watching over Amy. He then turns the corner towards his room and he sees Lori leaning against the doorframe. Rick walks past her as she moves up behind him and he sits on the bed. Lori walks up to him and says, "You and Shane? I heard most of it." Rick sighs and is about to speak before Lori says, "I am not so sure either of you know how to run things anymore." Rick says, "I know things have been a bit messy, but we're all doing the best we can." Lori sits on the other side of the bed and says, "That's certainly one way to put it," before continuing on to say, "Earlier today, Carl was asking about training again, but it was different this time. He doesn't just want to train so he can be helpful like you and Shane. He feels like he needs to defend himself in case anything like what happened to Dale happens again." Rick stays quiet for a second before he lays down in bed and says, I'm sure he does. And you're right, I know I don't have all the answers, but I promise, Lori, we'll figure this all out, I'm sure." Lori turns away from him and turns off the lights, and the episode ends here. Hey guys! Welcome to the end of the first episode of Season 2 of my Walking Dead Randomizer rewrite. What did y'all think? I know this episode was a bit slow, but it's going to be so important going forward as it's set up for so many possible future events. You know, especially with Shane finding out about everything that happened with Guillermo's group having been attacked and, you know, there being no cure finally being found out by everybody and Merle dying. Just, gosh, there's so much cool stuff. I can't wait to tell you guys what's going to be in store for the story. Also, a quick note on the visuals. While I do have some art for the side characters, almost all of the main characters are still up for grabs. So if you or any of your artist friends would like to have your art featured in the series, I would love the help. Feel free to reach out. Also, I do have one more thing to say about this before we end this out, and that is, I'm sorry for the variation in my microphone quality throughout this video. While filming, I have been in the process of moving, which is part of why this took so long, and now I live in a new place that doesn't have any of the soundproofing that my old room had, so the audio quality will probably be a little worse going forward. I just wanted to give that warning for those of you who stayed to the end. Anyways, I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye!